I'm Samantha Mitchell, 28 years old, sitting alone in my wedding dress. An hour before I'm supposed to walk down the aisle, my phone rings. It's my father. His voice is cold and distant as he tells me he won't be coming to give me away. The perfect day I've planned for months is crumbling around me. All because my sister Heather, who has hated me for as long as I can remember, finally made him choose sides. Before I tell you how my own sister destroyed what should have been the happiest day of my life, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever dealt with toxic family drama. Growing up in suburban Boston, our family seemed normal from the outside. My father Michael worked as an accountant, steady and reliable, while my mother Diana taught third grade at the local elementary school. Heather, 3 years older than me, was always the louder, more demanding child. I was quieter, more willing to compromise. Maybe that's where the problem started. From my earliest memories, Heather seemed to resent my very existence. When I was 5, I got a dollhouse for Christmas that was slightly larger than the one she'd received the previous year. She waited until our parents were busy in the kitchen and pushed it down the stairs, shattering it beyond repair. When they came running, she tearfully claimed I had been careless and knocked it over myself. Despite my protests, they believed her. This pattern would repeat endlessly throughout our childhood. If I earned an A on a test, Heather would bring home an A+. If I made the volleyball team, she'd become captain of the soccer team. It wasn't healthy competition, it was as if she couldn't stand for me to have any success or happiness that didn't somehow reflect back on her. The worst part was how she would sabotage me and then pretend to console me afterward, earning praise from our parents for being such a supportive big sister. "Girls will be girls," my mother would say with a tired smile whenever I tried to explain Heather's behavior. "Sisters fight sometimes. You'll be best friends when you grow up, you'll see." My father would retreat behind his newspaper, avoiding the conflict entirely. Neither of them seemed willing or able to see the deliberate cruelty in Heather's actions. Everything changed when my mother was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer during my freshman year of college. The 16 months between her diagnosis and her passing were brutal. We all handled our grief differently. I threw myself into my studies, coming home every weekend to help care for Mom. Heather took a leave of absence from her job to move back home and be Mom's primary caregiver. While I was grateful for her help, she used it to monopolize our mother's final months, often scheduling important doctor appointments on days when I had exams, forgetting to tell me about changes in Mom's condition until after the fact. After Mom died, our family fractured further. Dad, lost in his grief, leaned heavily on Heather. She had always been more outspoken, more like him in temperament, while I resembled our gentler, more reserved mother. What began as natural comfort-seeking gradually transformed into an unhealthy emotional dependence. Heather encouraged this, positioning herself as the only one who truly understood and could care for our father. Meanwhile, I was trying to finish college while processing my own grief. I'd call home regularly, but conversations with Dad became increasingly brief and superficial. Whenever I visited, Heather would hover around, interjecting herself into our interactions. If I suggested taking Dad out for lunch alone, she'd invite herself along or convince him he wasn't feeling well enough to go. The more I tried to maintain my relationship with my father, the more barriers Heather erected between us. I met Jason during my senior year of college. He was getting his master's in computer science, brilliant but down-to-earth, with a quiet strength that immediately drew me to him. On our third date, I broke down and told him everything about my family situation. Instead of being scared off by my emotional baggage, he held my hand and listened with genuine empathy. Over the next 2 years, he became not just my partner but my rock, helping me navigate the complicated terrain of my family dynamics with patience and understanding. When Jason proposed on a snowy evening in Boston Common, I was overjoyed but immediately anxious about how my family would react. To my surprise, when I called my father with the news, he seemed genuinely happy for me. "Your mother would have loved Jason," he said, his voice thick with emotion. For a moment, I felt the connection between us strengthen again. Then I heard Heather's voice in the background, asking who was calling, and Dad's tone shifted, becoming more formal and distant. Despite my misgivings, I wanted a traditional wedding with my family fully involved. Mom was gone, but I still had Dad, and despite everything, I wanted him to walk me down the aisle as she would have wanted. When Jason and I announced our engagement officially at a small family dinner, my father toasted us with tears in his eyes. Heather hugged me tightly, whispering congratulations that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so happy for you, little sis," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I always knew you'd find someone special." The words were perfect, but there was something in her smile that made my stomach clench with unease. Jason squeezed my hand under the table, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone anymore. I chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, this joyous occasion could heal some of our family's old wounds. I couldn't have been more wrong. The first signs of trouble appeared during what should have been a simple, joyful task: dress shopping. I invited Heather along with my two closest friends, hoping to extend an olive branch by including her in this special moment. The bridal boutique had champagne waiting, and the consultant had pulled several styles based on the inspiration photos I'd sent ahead. "You're going for white?" Heather asked as I emerged from the dressing room in the first gown, a classic A-line with delicate lace overlay. "With your skin tone, it might wash you out. Maybe ivory would be more forgiving." My friends exchanged glances, but I forced a smile. I've always pictured myself in traditional white, like Mom wore. "Mom was 10 years younger than you are now when she got married," Heather replied, sipping her champagne. "And she was always so fit." Each dress I tried earned similar subtle digs. This one made my arms look flabby. That one wouldn't hide my problem areas. Another was brave for someone with my body type. By the time I found a dress I loved, a gorgeous off-shoulder gown with a sweetheart neckline, my excitement had been thoroughly deflated by Heather's running commentary. When I stepped out in the one, even the consultant gasped. My friends had tears in their eyes. Heather studied me silently, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "It's not what I would choose, but if you love it." Later, my friend Lily pulled me aside. "What's your sister's problem? She's acting like she's being forced to watch a car crash instead of helping her only sister find a wedding dress." I sighed. That's just Heather being Heather. The venue selection triggered the next conflict. Jason and I fell in love with Hartwell Gardens, a historic estate with beautiful grounds and a charming renovated barn for the reception. When I mentioned it to Heather during a family dinner, her fork clattered against her plate. "Hartwell Gardens?" But she stopped herself, taking a deliberate sip of water before continuing. "That's where I've always dreamed of getting married. Ever since high school." This was news to me. I had no idea. "You've never mentioned it." "Well, I don't go around broadcasting my private dreams, Samantha," she said, her voice tight. "But Dad knows. I've talked about it for years. Right, Dad?" My father looked uncomfortable, caught between us. "I do remember you mentioning it once or twice," he admitted. "Once or twice." Heather gave a brittle laugh. "Try every time we drove past it. I literally have a Pinterest board dedicated to my future wedding there." Jason, ever the peacemaker, suggested there are lots of beautiful venues in the area. "We haven't made any decisions yet. We could look at some others." But I couldn't let it go. "Heather, you're not even dating anyone right now. We're planning to get married next spring. Are you seriously asking us to change our plans for a hypothetical future wedding?" "Typical Samantha," Heather snapped, throwing her napkin down. "Always so selfish. You've taken everything else from me, why not this too?" Dad placed a hand on Heather's arm. Now, let's not get upset. I'm sure your sister didn't realize how important this was to you, Heather." The way he immediately took her side, without even considering my position, felt like a slap in the face. Jason and I exchanged glances, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. This was just the beginning. The guest list became another battleground. Heather somehow appointed herself co-planner, adding names of distant relatives and her own friends to our spreadsheet without asking. When I confronted her, she acted shocked that I would question her contributions. "I'm just trying to make sure no one important gets left out," she said defensively. Dad agrees that we should invite the Andersons, even though you barely remember them. They were Mom's dear friends. The Andersons had moved away when I was 12 and had barely kept in touch. I had no desire to share my special day with virtual strangers, but once again, my father backed Heather. Your mother would want them there, he said firmly, in a tone that brooked no argument. And your cousins from Seattle, too. The cousins who bullied me throughout childhood. I asked incredulously. Dad, this is my wedding. Shouldn't Jason and I have the final say on who attends? Dad sighed heavily. Samantha, don't be difficult. Family is family. Later, when I told Jason about the conversation, he voiced what I had been afraid to acknowledge. Babe, I don't think this is about the guest list. Have you noticed how your dad automatically sides with Heather on every decision? It's like he can't even hear your perspective. He's always been that way, I said, trying to dismiss the concern. He hates conflict, and Heather is more insistent. It's more than that, Jason insisted. It's like he's forgotten how to form his own opinions apart from hers. When was the last time you had a conversation with him where Heather wasn't present or immediately consulted? I couldn't remember, and that realization sent a chill through me. The rehearsal dinner planning brought things to a breaking point. Jason's parents had generously offered to host it at their country club, a traditional gesture they were excited about. When I told my father and Heather about the plan, Heather immediately objected. A country club? Really? How stuffy and pretentious. I thought we agreed on that new gastropub downtown. We never discussed the rehearsal dinner, I said, confused. And Jason's parents are hosting, so it's their choice. Well, Dad and I were talking, and we think the gastropub would be more appropriate. Less showy, more genuine. Right, Dad? My father nodded. The club does seem a bit formal. Your mother never liked those places. This isn't about what Mom would like, I said, my patience finally snapping. It's about Jason's parents wanting to do something nice for us, and you two having a weird parallel planning process that excludes the actual bride and groom. Now you're just being dramatic, Heather said dismissively. Dad and I are trying to help, but you're so wrapped up in princess fantasies that you can't see it. I looked to my father, hoping for support, but he was staring at his hands, avoiding conflict as always. Perhaps we should discuss this another time, he murmured. That night, Jason held me while I cried. I don't understand what's happening, I sobbed. It's like they're planning their own event, and I'm just expected to show up and play my part. We can elope, Jason offered, only half joking. Fly to Hawaii, get married on the beach, send them a postcard after. The idea was tempting, but I shook my head. Despite everything, I still want my dad to walk me down the aisle. I still want a real wedding with our families there. Is that crazy? Jason kissed my forehead. Not crazy. Just hopeful. But Samantha, I'm worried about how this is affecting you. Your sister seems determined to make this process miserable, and your dad is enabling her. It'll get better, I insisted, trying to convince myself as much as him. Once we get closer to the wedding day, they'll realize how important this is and put their issues aside. I clung to that hope, even as evidence mounted that Heather had no intention of letting my wedding day be about anyone but herself. The final week before the wedding arrived with a flurry of last-minute details. My stress levels were through the roof, not helped by Heather's increasingly hostile behavior. She'd begun making snide comments about Jason when she thought I couldn't hear, questioning his career prospects and whether he was settling by marrying me. I was picking up our wedding bands when I ran into Mrs. Peterson, my father's next-door neighbor. She congratulated me on the wedding, then added, "Your poor father, though. Heather tells me you're moving to California right after the ceremony? He'll be all alone." I stood there stunned. What? We're not moving anywhere. Who told you that? Mrs. Peterson looked confused. Oh, I must have misunderstood. Heather mentioned it when she was helping your father with his yard work last weekend. Something about Jason accepting a job in Silicon Valley. Ice formed in the pit of my stomach. Jason worked for a Boston-based software company with no plans to relocate. This was a complete fabrication, but it explained why my father had been increasingly distant. What else had Heather been telling him? I drove straight to my father's house, determined to clear things up. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Heather's car already there. Taking a deep breath, I walked in using my key, following the sound of voices to the kitchen. Doesn't even want you to make a toast at the reception, Heather was saying. I heard her telling Jason it would be too long and boring. After everything you've done for her. My father's shoulders were slumped, his expression wounded. I had a speech prepared. Your mother always said I gave good toasts. Dad, I said from the doorway, making them both jump. That's not true. I've been hoping you would give a toast. I never said otherwise. Heather recovered quickly, her expression shifting to one of concern. Samantha. We were just talking about the wedding. Dad's feeling a little left out of the planning. Because you've been feeding him lies, I said, unable to contain my anger any longer. We're not moving to California after the wedding. Jason doesn't have a job offer there. I never said anything about Dad's toast being boring. What game are you playing, Heather? My father looked between us, confusion written across his face. Is this true, Heather? About California. Heather laughed, but it sounded forced. There's obviously been a misunderstanding. I thought I heard Jason mention a potential offer. Maybe I got it wrong. And what about the other things? I pressed. Have you been telling Dad I'm mocking him behind his back? That Jason doesn't respect him? Because that's what Mrs. Peterson implied, and none of it is true. You're being paranoid, Heather said, her voice hardening. You've always been so insecure, always thinking people are against you. If Dad and I have private conversations, that's our business. Not when you're lying about me and my fiancé. I was nearly shouting now, weeks of frustration boiling over. My father stood up, his expression pained. I think everyone needs to calm down. Samantha, this isn't the time for accusations. Your sister has been by my side every day while you've been busy with your own life. If she says there's been a misunderstanding, I believe her. His words hit me like a physical blow. Dad, please. You know me. You know I would never disrespect you or try to exclude you from my wedding. That's the last thing I want. For a moment, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Then Heather placed a hand on his shoulder, and his expression hardened. I think you should go, Samantha. We'll see you at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. I left, tears streaming down my face, and called Jason immediately. He was furious when I explained what had happened. This is beyond sibling rivalry, he said. She's deliberately trying to sabotage our relationship with your father. We need to talk to him alone, make him see what's happening. But getting my father alone proved impossible. At the rehearsal dinner, held at the country club despite Heather's objections, he was cold and distant. He went through the motions during the rehearsal, practicing walking me down the aisle with mechanical precision, but there was no warmth in his eyes, no emotion in his voice when he responded to the officiant's question about who gives the bride away. Heather, meanwhile, was playing the perfect supportive sister for the assembled guests, hugging me for photos and laughing just a bit too loudly. Only I could see the triumph in her eyes when she glanced between me and our distant father. I tried to speak with him privately after the rehearsal, but he begged off, claiming fatigue. We'll talk tomorrow, he said, not meeting my eyes. Before the ceremony. I went to bed that night with a sense of foreboding that kept me tossing and turning until dawn. The morning of my wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that contrasted cruelly with my inner turmoil. My bridesmaids arrived at the hotel suite early, bringing champagne and breakfast, filling the room with excited chatter as hair and makeup artists set up their stations. Through it all, I kept checking my phone, waiting for my father to call or text. At 10 o'clock, I tried calling him. No answer. At 11, I tried again. Straight to voicemail. By noon, with only 3 hours until the ceremony, panic was setting in. He's probably just getting ready, my maid of honor, Lily, reassured me. Men don't realize how long everything takes. He'll be there. I nodded, trying to believe her, but the knot in my stomach tightened with each passing hour. I was getting my veil attached when my phone finally rang. Dad's name flashed on the screen, and I nearly knocked over the hairstylist in my rush to answer. Dad, where are you? I've been trying to reach you all morning. There was a long pause before he spoke, his voice distant and formal. Samantha, I need to tell you something. I won't be coming to the wedding today. The room around me seemed to tilt. What? Dad, what are you talking about? I know everything, he said, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. About how you and Jason laugh at me behind my back. How you think I'm an embarrassment. How you've been planning to cut me out of your life after the wedding. None of that is true. I cried, tears already welling up. Dad, please, Heather has been lying to you. Whatever she's told you. Don't blame your sister, he cut me off. She's the only one who's been honest with me. The only one who's stood by me since your mother died. Dad, I love you. I want you at my wedding. I want you to walk me down the aisle like you and Mom always planned. I'm sorry, Samantha. I've made my decision. There was a finality in his voice that froze my blood. I hope someday you'll understand. The line went dead. I stood there, my wedding dress half-fastened, veil askew, staring at the phone in my hand as if it were a snake that had just bitten me. My bridesmaids gathered around, their faces reflecting the horror they'd gleaned from my side of the conversation. He's not coming, I whispered, the words hanging in the air like shattered glass. My father isn't coming to my wedding. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. My bridesmaids formed a protective circle around me, shielding me from the curious eyes of the makeup artists and hotel staff. Lily took charge, sending one friend to get more champagne, another to inform the wedding planner of the potential issue, while she sat beside me, holding my hand as I struggled to process what had just happened. He believes her, I kept saying, my voice hollow with shock. After everything, he actually believes I would mock him, that I'd want to cut him out of my life. It's manipulation, Lily said firmly. Your sister has been poisoning him against you for years, and this is her ultimate power play. She couldn't stand for you to have this day. My phone buzzed with a text notification. Thinking it might be my father reconsidering, I lunged for it. Instead, it was a message from my cousin. Just saw Heather's Instagram story. She and your dad are having lunch at Giovanni's. Thought you should know. Giovanni's was my mother's favorite restaurant, where we'd gone for special family occasions throughout my childhood. The final piece clicked into place. Heather hadn't just convinced my father to abandon me on my wedding day. She was celebrating her victory by taking him to a place loaded with emotional significance. I can't do this, I whispered, staring at my reflection in the mirror, hair and makeup perfect, eyes red-rimmed and hollow. How am I supposed to walk down the aisle alone? Everyone will be whispering, wondering where Dad is. There was a gentle knock at the door. Lily answered it, speaking in hushed tones with someone before turning back to me. It's Jason. He heard what happened and wants to see you. But it's bad luck. Screw tradition, Lily said fiercely. You need him right now. When Jason entered, his face filled with concern and love, something in me broke. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest, heedless of my makeup or carefully styled hair. He held me tight, murmuring soothing words as I poured out my grief and humiliation. We don't have to go through with this today, he said when I'd calmed enough to hear him. We can postpone. Anyone who loves us will understand. I pulled back, searching his face. Is that what you want? What I want is for you to be happy, he said simply. If going ahead with the wedding today will bring you more pain than joy, then let's wait. If you want to get married today despite everything, then I'm right beside you. Whatever you decide, I'm with you 100%. His unconditional support steadied me. I took a deep breath, considering our options. Postponing meant letting Heather win, admitting defeat. Going ahead meant facing pitying looks and whispered questions. Neither choice was perfect. I still want to marry you today, I said finally. I've been waiting to be your wife, and I don't want to wait anymore. But I don't know if I can walk down that aisle alone with everyone staring. There was a commotion at the door, and Jason's father, Robert, appeared, slightly out of breath. He was already dressed in his tuxedo, his kind face creased with concern. I just heard, he said, coming to take my hands in his. Samantha, I'm so sorry. What your father is doing is unforgivable. Fresh tears threatened, but I blinked them back. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can face everyone. Robert squeezed my hands gently. I have a suggestion, if you'll hear it. It would be the greatest honor of my life to walk you down the aisle. Not as a replacement for your father, no one could be that, but as someone who already loves you like a daughter and who would be proud to stand beside you today. His offer, made with such genuine affection, broke through the last of my defenses. I hugged him tightly, overwhelmed by the generosity of this man who had welcomed me into his family without reservation. "Thank you," I whispered. I would be honored. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of activity. My makeup had to be redone, my hair readjusted. The wedding planner made subtle changes to the ceremony, removing the traditional "who gives this woman" line that would have been too painful to hear. Jason's mother arrived, wrapping me in a maternal embrace that made me miss my own mother with renewed intensity. "She would be so proud of you," she said, as if reading my thoughts. "So proud of your strength and grace under pressure." By the time I stood at the back of the garden, arm-linked with Robert's, the emotional storm had passed, leaving a strange calm in its wake. The string quartet began playing Canon in D, guests rose to their feet, and the doors opened to reveal the garden path strewn with rose petals, leading to where Jason waited beneath an arch of spring flowers. I scanned the assembled faces quickly, registering the absence of my father and Heather among the crowd. There was an empty seat in the front row where my father should have been, a visible reminder of his betrayal. For a moment, grief threatened to overwhelm me again. Then I looked ahead and saw Jason, his eyes filled with such love and certainty that everything else receded. Robert patted my hand. "Ready?" I nodded, squaring my shoulders. "Ready." We began the walk, my future father-in-law matching his pace to mine, solid and supportive at my side. Halfway down the aisle, I noticed Jason's parents had placed a framed photo of my mother on what would have been her seat, a small bouquet of her favorite flowers beside it. The thoughtful gesture brought tears to my eyes, but they were different from the tears I'd shed earlier, bittersweet rather than despairing. When we reached the altar, Robert kissed my cheek and placed my hand in Jason's. "Take care of each other," he said, his voice carrying to the front rows. The ceremony itself passed in an emotional blur. I remember the warmth of Jason's hands holding mine, the sincerity in his voice as he recited his vows, the weight of the ring as he slipped it onto my finger. Despite everything, when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, genuine joy bubbled up inside me. We had made it. Whatever else happened, we were married now, bonded together against whatever storms might come. The reception was both beautiful and surreal. The barn at Hartwell Gardens had been transformed with twinkling lights and floral arrangements, exactly as we'd envisioned. Our friends surrounded us with love and support, deliberately avoiding mentions of my father's absence. Jason's father gave a moving toast that brought many guests to tears, speaking of the resilience of true love and the family bonds we choose to create. I was making my rounds, thanking guests for coming, when a ripple of whispers caught my attention. I turned to see Heather standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She was dressed immaculately, as if she'd spent hours on her appearance rather than destroying my relationship with our father. Several guests glanced uncomfortably between us, clearly aware of the situation. My first instinct was to ignore her, to refuse to let her presence taint what remained of my wedding day. But as she made her way toward me, the smug curl of her lips ignited something in me. This woman had manipulated our grieving father, had deliberately and systematically worked to exclude me from my own family, had caused me immeasurable pain on what should have been the happiest day of my life. And she was proud of it. "Samantha," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "I'm so sorry I'm late. Dad wasn't feeling well enough to come, but he wanted me to tell you." "Stop," I cut her off, my voice quiet but firm. "Stop lying. Stop pretending. Not here. Not today." Heather's eyes widened in mock innocence. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just trying to." "I know exactly what you're trying to do," I said, louder now, drawing attention from more guests. "You've been trying to sabotage my wedding from day one. You told Dad I was mocking him behind his back. You made up lies about Jason and me moving away. You convinced him to abandon me on my wedding day, and now you have the audacity to show up here and continue your performance? No. I'm done letting you manipulate this family." Heather's facade cracked, revealing the anger beneath. "You've always been so dramatic," she hissed. "Always playing the victim. Poor little Samantha, everyone's favorite. Do you have any idea what it's been like living in your shadow?" "My shadow," I repeated incredulously. You've spent our entire lives trying to outdo me, to take everything that was mine. What more do you want from me, Heather? You've already taken our father. Taken him. Heather laughed, a bitter, ugly sound that turned heads throughout the reception. He was always yours. From the day you were born, you were the precious baby, the perfect daughter. Mom and Dad both doted on you while I was expected to be the responsible one, the independent one. Be nice to your sister, Heather. Share with your sister, Heather. Why can't you be sweet like Samantha? The raw hatred in her voice stunned me into momentary silence. All these years, while I'd felt overshadowed and overlooked in favor of my accomplished older sister, she had been nurturing a completely opposite perception of our childhood. So this was revenge? I asked quietly. Turning Dad against me on my wedding day was payback for some perceived favoritism from decades ago? He deserved to know the truth about you, she spat. That you've always looked down on him, just like you looked down on me. That the minute you married your precious Jason, you'd forget all about us. I was protecting him. By now, a circle had formed around us, guests watching the family drama unfold with uncomfortable fascination. Jason appeared at my side, placing a supportive hand on my back. You need to leave, he told Heather, his voice low but firm. You've done enough damage. Heather's gaze shifted to him, contempt written across her features. Of course you'd take her side. Everyone always does. Poor, perfect Samantha can never be wrong. This isn't about sides, I said, suddenly exhausted by the decades of rivalry and resentment. This is about what you did, Heather. You lied to our father. You manipulated him. You deliberately ruined something important to me out of spite. What kind of sister does that? For a split second, something like shame flickered across Heather's face. Then her expression hardened again. He made his choice. If he didn't come today, it's because deep down, he knows I'm right about you. No, said a familiar voice from behind me. It's because I was a fool who couldn't see what was happening right in front of me. I turned to find my father standing there, still wearing the suit he'd presumably chosen for the wedding, his face ashen. Confused murmurs rippled through the watching guests. Dad? Heather's voice had changed, becoming small and uncertain. What are you doing here? I thought you weren't feeling well. I wasn't, he said heavily. I haven't been well for a long time. But seeing your Instagram post shocked me back to my senses. Celebrating at Giovanni's while your sister got married without me? That's when I finally saw the truth. He turned to me, his eyes filled with shame and regret. Samantha, I don't expect you to forgive me. What I did today is unforgivable. I let my own grief and weakness blind me to what was happening. I failed you, just as I've been failing you for years. The apology I'd been desperate for just hours ago now left me numb. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw not the strong, infallible parent of my childhood, but a broken, flawed man who had allowed himself to be manipulated because it was easier than facing reality. You should go, I said quietly. Both of you. This is still my wedding day, and I want to spend it with people who truly care about me. Heather opened her mouth to protest, but Dad placed a hand on her arm, shaking his head. She's right. We should go. He looked at me one last time, sorrow etched into every line of his face. I'm so sorry, Samantha. I hope someday you can forgive me. They left, Heather's stiff back and my father's slumped shoulders disappearing through the doorway as the assembled guests parted to let them pass. As soon as they were gone, the tension in the room broke. Jason wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. Are you okay? He whispered against my hair. I wasn't sure how to answer. The confrontation had left me emotionally drained, yet strangely lighter, as if a poison had been drawn from a wound. I will be, I said finally. We will be. The band, sensing the need to shift the mood, began playing a lively tune. Jason's parents approached, offering wordless support through their presence. Gradually, the celebration resumed, guests returning to their tables, conversations restarting. The drama had passed, leaving behind a subdued but genuine atmosphere of community and love. Later that night, as Jason and I swayed together during our last dance, I realized something important. Despite everything, I had gotten married surrounded by people who truly loved me. The empty chair where my father should have been was painful, yes, But it was also a reminder that sometimes the family we choose is more important than the family we're born into. No regrets? Jason asked softly. I looked up at him, at the man who had stood beside me through all of this with unwavering support. No regrets, I answered truthfully. This isn't the wedding day I imagined, but it's ours. And tomorrow, we start our real adventure together. As the music faded and our guests prepared for our exit, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my father. I know words aren't enough. But when you're ready to talk, I'll be here. I love you, Samantha. I slipped the phone back into my maid of honor's hand without responding. That conversation would come, but not today. Today was for new beginnings, not old wounds. Today was for looking forward, not back. Hand in hand with my husband, I ran through a shower of rose petals toward our waiting car, toward our future together, leaving the pain and betrayal of the past, if not behind me completely, then at least firmly in its proper place, the past. The 2 weeks of our honeymoon in Greece provided a blissful buffer from reality. Jason and I explored ancient ruins, swam in crystal-clear waters, and ate our weight in authentic Mediterranean cuisine. With limited cell service and a mutual agreement to focus solely on each other, we managed to temporarily push aside the family drama that had marred our wedding day. But eventually, our plane touched down in Boston and real life came rushing back. There were dozens of messages from my father, voicemails that grew increasingly desperate, texts apologizing and begging for a chance to explain. Heather, in contrast, had maintained radio silence. You don't have to deal with this right away, Jason said as we unpacked in our apartment. Take some time to settle back in. I appreciated his concern, but the unresolved situation hung over me like a storm cloud. I can't just ignore it forever. Especially since Dad keeps reaching out. Do you want to forgive him? Jason asked carefully. I folded a sundress with deliberate precision, buying time to consider the question. I don't know. Part of me wants to write him off completely after what he did. But another part remembers that he's been manipulated by Heather for years. And he's still my only parent. The morning after our return, I was sorting through our mail when a message popped up on my phone. It was from my cousin Zoe. You might want to check Heather's Facebook. She's telling everyone you had a bridezilla meltdown and kicked her and your dad out of the wedding for no reason. People are actually believing her. My hands shaking with anger, I logged into Facebook for the first time since before the wedding. Sure enough, Heather had crafted an elaborate narrative positioning herself as the victim of my irrational behavior. According to her post, she and Dad had arrived slightly late to the reception due to his health issues, only for me to publicly humiliate them and demand they leave because I was jealous of the attention she received. The comments section was filled with sympathetic responses, mutual friends expressing shock at my alleged behavior, distant relatives sharing their own stories of difficult family members. The character assassination was so complete, so calculated, that for a moment I could only stare at the screen in disbelief. She's unbelievable, Jason said, reading over my shoulder. Are you going to respond? Not online, I said, shutting my laptop with a decisive click. That's exactly what she wants, a public fight where she can play the victim. But I'm done letting her control the narrative. Instead, I called my father. When he answered, his voice was hesitant, almost fearful. Samantha? I didn't expect to hear from you so soon. We need to talk, I said, keeping my tone neutral. In person. And I want to speak with you alone. No, Heather. There was a pause. Of course. When and where? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes, neutral territory where neither of us would have the home field advantage. When I arrived the next day, he was already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He looked older somehow, the lines in his face deeper than I remembered. I ordered your usual, he said as I sat down. Vanilla latte with an extra shot. Thanks. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup but didn't drink. I saw Heather's Facebook post. Dad winced. I told her to take it down. She refused. Are you surprised? I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. She's been rewriting reality for years, and you've let her. I know, he admitted, shoulders slumping. I've enabled her behavior. After your mother died, It was just easier to go along with Heather's version of events than to question her. She was so present, so certain, and I was so lost. That doesn't excuse what happened at my wedding, I said firmly. You believed the worst about me based on her word alone. You didn't even give me a chance to explain. You're right. He met my gaze directly for the first time. There's no excuse for what I did. When I saw that Instagram post, Heather smiling at Giovanni's while you were getting married without me, something finally clicked. I realized how she'd been manipulating me, playing on my insecurities and grief. By the time I got to the reception, it was too late. The damage was done. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? My voice cracked despite my efforts to stay composed. My own father choosing to believe I was mocking him, planning to abandon him, all without a shred of evidence. Do you know what that feels like? Dad's eyes filled with tears. I do now. Because I've lost your trust, maybe forever. And I deserve that. But Samantha, I want you to know that I'm getting help. I've started seeing a therapist to understand how I let things get this bad. How I failed both my daughters in different ways. His admission caught me off guard. My father had always been stoically opposed to therapy, calling it paying strangers to listen to your problems. That he was willing to seek help now indicated a level of self-awareness I hadn't expected. Both daughters. I repeated. How did you fail Heather? She got exactly what she wanted. Did she? Dad shook his head sadly. Heather is deeply unhappy. Has been for years. I indulged her need for control and attention instead of helping her develop healthier ways to cope with her insecurities. I let her define herself in opposition to you rather than finding her own path. That's on me. I absorbed this perspective, seeing the situation through new eyes. Heather's jealousy and manipulation had made her miserable too, trapping her in a cycle of resentment and competition that could never bring fulfillment. Have you talked to her about any of this? I asked. I tried. After the wedding, I told her we needed to have an honest conversation about her behavior. She flew into a rage, accused me of choosing you over her, just like she claims Mom, and I always did. He sighed heavily. She hasn't spoken to me since. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication that my father had finally seen through Heather's manipulations, sadness for the broken relationship between them, and lingering anger at how long it had taken him to recognize the truth. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I said honestly. What happened wasn't just a single mistake. It was years of allowing Heather to drive a wedge between us, years of taking her side without question. I understand, he said quietly. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. Just a chance to try and make things right. To rebuild our relationship on more honest terms. I've lost so much already, your mother, and now it seems Heather too. I don't want to lose you as well. What would that even look like? I asked. Rebuilding our relationship. I thought maybe we could start small. Regular dinners, just the two of us. No Heather, no buffer. Just father and daughter talking honestly. I want to get to know the woman you've become, Samantha. I've missed so much by viewing you through Heather's distorted lens. The offer was tempting, but I needed to establish clear boundaries. If we do this, there are conditions. Complete honesty between us. No triangulating through Heather or anyone else. And if I find out you're sharing our conversations with her or letting her influence your perception of me again, we're done. Permanently. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Those are fair terms. We talked for another hour, beginning the difficult process of untangling years of misunderstandings and manipulations. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. Too much damage had been done for that, but it was a start. A tentative first step toward healing. As I was preparing to leave, Dad handed me an envelope. Heather doesn't know I have this. It came to the house a few days ago. It was addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. I opened it to find a formal apology from the Andersons, the family friends Heather had insisted we invite, expressing their regret at missing the wedding due to never receiving an invitation. According to their letter, Heather had told them the wedding had been postponed. She intercepted the invitations, I realized. She told them the wedding was postponed and told us they were coming. She was creating problems that didn't exist. Dad nodded grimly. There's more. I've been going through old emails and messages. The venue you chose? Heather never mentioned wanting to get married there before you selected it. The Pinterest board she claimed to have had for years? Created 2 days before she confronted you about stealing her dream venue. The extent of Heather's deception was staggering. She hadn't just manipulated situations, she had fabricated entire narratives, creating conflicts out of thin air to drive wedges between my father and me. Why? I whispered. Why go to such lengths? I wish I knew, Dad said sadly. All I can think is that somewhere along the way, her identity became wrapped up in being the better daughter, the one I relied on. Your wedding threatened that identity. You were moving forward with your life, creating your own family, while she's been stuck in the same pattern since your mother died. As I drove home, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter for having taken the first step toward reconciliation with my father, heavier with the knowledge of just how calculated my sister's betrayal had been. Jason was waiting for me, concern written across his face. How did it go? He asked, pulling me into a comforting embrace. Better than I expected, I admitted. We're going to try to rebuild our relationship. Slowly. And Heather? She's been spreading lies about the wedding online. Apparently, she's cut off contact with Dad because he finally stood up to her. I showed him the Andersons' letter and explained the extent of Heather's fabrications. This goes beyond sibling rivalry, Jason said, shaking his head in disbelief. This is pathological. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. You think you've won because Dad's suddenly taking your side? This isn't over. He'll see the truth about you eventually. Heather. I showed the message to Jason, who immediately wanted to respond, to defend me. But I simply blocked the number. Engaging would only feed her need for conflict, for continued control over my emotional state. For the first time in my life, I was choosing not to play her game at all. The next morning, I discovered she had extended her campaign to Instagram and Twitter, posting thinly veiled references to toxic family members and narcissistic sisters. Several mutual friends messaged me, confused by the contradicting narratives. Should I make a public statement? I asked Jason over breakfast. Set the record straight. He considered the question carefully. What would that accomplish? The people who truly know you won't believe her lies. And correcting her publicly might just escalate things. He was right. The healthiest response was no response at all. I needed to focus on healing my relationship with my father and building my new life with Jason, not engaging in Heather's social media war. When my father called to invite me to dinner that weekend, I accepted. It would be our first official step toward reconciliation. As I hung up, I felt cautiously optimistic that something positive might emerge from the wreckage of my wedding day after all. Jason and I returned from our honeymoon to discover our apartment building had suffered water damage from a burst pipe while we were away. Though our unit was mostly spared, we needed to temporarily relocate while repairs were completed. After a brief discussion, we decided to rent a short-term furnished apartment rather than impose on friends or family. We could stay with my parents, Jason had offered. They'd be thrilled. I love your parents, I'd replied honestly, but I think we need our own space right now. Especially with everything else going on. The everything else was primarily my fragile reconciliation with my father and Heather's ongoing campaign of social media slander. Though I'd stopped actively checking her accounts, mutual acquaintances kept me unwillingly updated on her latest fabrications. According to Heather's evolving narrative, I had not only humiliated her at my wedding, but had subsequently tried to turn our father against her out of jealousy over their close relationship. My first dinner alone with Dad was awkward but productive. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant, not Giovanni's, with its loaded family history, but a new place neither of us had visited before. I've been thinking a lot about patterns, Dad said as we waited for our entrees. How easy it is to fall into them without realizing it. After your mother died, I leaned on Heather because she reminded me of myself, practical, decisive. You reminded me so much of your mother that it was painful to be close to you. I didn't know that, I said quietly. I should have told you. Instead, I pulled away and let Heather fill the void. She was all too happy to be the center of my world, and I was all too willing to let her manage everything, including my relationship with you. He shook his head. My therapist calls it emotional outsourcing. I gave Heather control because making decisions, dealing with complex feelings, was too overwhelming after losing your mother. That explains a lot, I admitted. But it doesn't excuse what happened at the wedding. No, he agreed firmly. Nothing excuses that. It was the wake-up call I needed, but it came at an inexcusable cost to you. We established a new ritual: Sunday dinners, just the two of us. Sometimes at restaurants, sometimes at his house or my temporary apartment. Each week, the conversation flowed more naturally, the awkward pauses fewer and further between. We avoided discussing Heather directly, focusing instead on rebuilding our own connection. 3 weeks after our first dinner, Dad arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. He'd clearly had a sleepless night. Heather came to the house yesterday, he explained as I poured him coffee. She wanted to clear the air about the wedding. Which meant she wanted me to agree with her version of events. What did you tell her? I asked carefully. The truth. That she had manipulated me for years, turned me against you with lies and distortions. That I was ashamed of missing your wedding and intended to make amends however I could. He rubbed his temples. She didn't take it well. I can imagine, I murmured. She accused me of choosing sides, the same thing she accused me of doing throughout your childhood, only in her mind. I had always chosen you. The irony is that I did choose sides for years after your mother died, and it was always Heather's. He looked up at me, his expression pained. She gave me an ultimatum. Either I cut off contact with you, or she would cut off contact with me. My stomach tightened. What did you say? I told her I wouldn't be manipulated anymore. That I love both my daughters and wouldn't choose between them, but I also wouldn't tolerate her lies about you. His voice cracked slightly. She called me a traitor and stormed out. She's blocked my calls, my texts. Even blocked me on social media. I reached across the table and took his hand. Despite everything, I felt genuine sympathy for him. I'm sorry, Dad. I know how much you care about her. The sad thing is, I enabled this behavior. All those years of giving in to her demands, of letting her control the family narrative, I helped create this situation. He squeezed my hand. But I'm done letting Heather dictate my relationship with you. Whatever happens with her, I want you to know that. The next few weeks brought escalating hostility from Heather. She expanded her social media campaign, creating posts that thinly veiled her accusations against me and our father, painting herself as the victim of family betrayal. She reached out to extended family members, feeding them distorted versions of events designed to turn them against us. Some relatives believed her, reaching out to me with concerned messages about my treatment of my sister. Others contacted my father, expressing worry about his mental health based on Heather's claims that he was being brainwashed by me. A few saw through the manipulation and contacted us privately to offer support. She's turned this into a full-time job, I remarked to Jason one evening as I scrolled through yet another well-meaning but misinformed text from a cousin. It's like her entire identity is wrapped up in this conflict now. That's exactly what it is, Jason agreed. Without the role of Dad's protector and Samantha's superior, she doesn't know who she is. The most difficult moment came when I discovered Heather had contacted Jason's parents, spinning a tale about how I was isolating our father from the family and expressing concern about what kind of wife I would be to their son. Fortunately, my in-laws knew me well enough to recognize the manipulation. They forwarded Heather's email to me with a supportive note assuring me they weren't falling for her tactics. Still, the constant stream of drama was exhausting. Every time I thought things might be settling down, Heather would find a new angle of attack, a new audience for her grievances. It began affecting my sleep, my work, even my new marriage. I hate seeing what this is doing to you, Jason said one night as I lay awake beside him. Maybe we should consider moving, making a fresh start somewhere else. The suggestion was tempting. My event planning job could be done anywhere, and Jason's software company had offices in several cities. We could leave Boston, leave the toxicity behind, start fresh somewhere Heather couldn't reach us so easily. But the idea of running away felt like another kind of defeat. I don't want her to drive me away from my home, from Dad, from the life we're building here, I told Jason. That would be letting her win. This isn't about winning or losing, he reminded me gently. It's about what's healthiest for us. He was right, of course. I'd spent my entire life reacting to Heather, defining myself in relation to her attacks and manipulations. Moving away wouldn't solve the core problem, which was within me. I needed to completely detach my sense of self and well-being from Heather's behavior. After much discussion, Jason and I decided to stay in Boston, but set firm boundaries around how much Heather-related drama we would allow into our lives. I stopped reading her social media posts completely, blocked her on all platforms, and asked friends and family not to relay her latest accusations unless they posed an actual threat. My father, meanwhile, was making his own difficult decision. After several failed attempts to communicate with Heather, he sent her a formal letter outlining his concerns about her behavior and requesting that she seek professional help as a condition for rebuilding their relationship. "I can't keep enabling her," he told me. "She needs help that I'm not qualified to provide." As her father, the most loving thing I can do is be honest about that. Heather's response came in the form of a scathing email sent to the entire extended family, accusing our father of elder abuse and claiming I had coerced him into cutting her off. The allegations were so outlandish that they undermined her credibility even with relatives who had previously been sympathetic to her. My Aunt Marge, my mother's sister who had always been fond of Heather, called me directly after receiving the email. "I've been trying to give her the benefit of the doubt," she admitted. "But this goes beyond a family disagreement. She's making things up wholesale now." "She's been doing that for years," I said wearily. "We just didn't see it clearly until now." Aunt Marge was silent for a moment. "Your mother would be heartbroken by all this," she said finally. "But I think she'd be proud of how you're handling it. You're not stooping to Heather's level, not engaging in the drama. That takes real strength." Her words meant more than she could know. I'd been struggling with thoughts of my mother throughout this ordeal, wondering what she would make of the family's disintegration, whether she could have prevented it if she'd lived. As summer turned to fall, the intensity of Heather's campaign gradually diminished. Having failed to turn the family against us, having received no response to her increasingly desperate provocations, she seemed to run out of fuel for her fire of resentment. Her posts became less frequent, her outreach to relatives more sporadic. It wasn't a resolution so much as an exhausted ceasefire. Dad continued his therapy, working through decades of unresolved grief and relationship patterns. We maintained our Sunday dinners, slowly rebuilding a father-daughter relationship based on direct communication rather than Heather's filtered version. It wasn't always easy. We had years of misunderstandings to untangle, but each week brought small improvements. 5 months after the wedding, Dad and I were having dinner at my and Jason's new apartment. We'd finally moved back in after the repairs were completed, when he asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think Heather will ever change? Ever recognize what she's done and try to make amends?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't know. Part of me hopes she will, for her own sake as much as ours. But I'm not counting on it, and I'm not making my happiness dependent on her transformation." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "That's wise." I've been holding on to hope that with enough time and space, she might gain some self-awareness. But my therapist says I need to accept that might never happen, that Heather might never be capable of the kind of honest self-reflection required to change these patterns. "And if she doesn't change?" I asked. "Can you accept that?" "I'm learning to," he said. "It's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, accepting that I might never reconcile with her. That the relationship I have with one daughter might permanently cost me the relationship with the other." His eyes grew damp. "But I keep reminding myself that it's Heather's choices that created this situation, not yours or mine. And continuing to enable her would only make things worse for everyone, including her." It was the most insight I'd ever heard from my father, a level of emotional maturity he'd never displayed before. For the first time, I felt genuine hope that our relationship could not only heal, but evolve into something stronger than it had ever been. The next morning, an unmarked envelope arrived in our mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from Heather. The handwriting was angular and pressed hard into the page, revealing her emotional state as clearly as her words. "I know you think you've won," it began. "That you've turned Dad against me just like you turned Mom against me all those years. But the truth always comes out eventually. Someday you'll slip up, show your true colors, and he'll remember who's really been there for him. Until then, enjoy playing the victim. You've always been good at that. There was no signature, just those bitter words floating on the page. I showed the letter to Jason, who wanted to tear it up immediately. Wait, I said, folding it carefully and placing it in a drawer. I want to keep it. Why would you want to keep something so toxic? He asked, bewildered. Because it's the first completely honest communication I've had from Heather in years, I explained. No manipulation, no false sweetness, just the raw truth of how she sees me, how she's always seen me. There's something clarifying about that. I didn't open the drawer again, didn't reread the letter, but knowing it was there served as a reminder of the reality I was dealing with. Not the sister I wished Heather could be, not the family dynamics I had hoped for, but the actual situation, a deeply troubled woman whose jealousy and insecurity had calcified into hatred, who was currently incapable of honest relationship. Accepting that truth was painful but necessary. It allowed me to finally stop hoping for a miraculous change in Heather and focus instead on nurturing the relationships that were healthy and whole in my life. My marriage to Jason, my rebuilding connection with my father, my true friendships that had weathered the storm of family drama. 6 months after our wedding, as Jason and I celebrated our half-year anniversary with a quiet dinner at home, I realized something important. Despite everything, the wedding day disaster, the family fracturing, Heather's campaign of lies, I was happy. Not perfectly so, not without moments of sadness for what might have been, but genuinely content with the life Jason and I were building together. I've been thinking, I told him as we shared a slice of cake, a miniature version of our wedding cake, which Jason had specially ordered. Maybe it's time to fully close this chapter and focus completely on our future. What do you have in mind? He asked. I took a deep breath. I think it's time to stop checking whether Heather's still posting about us, stop worrying about what mutual friends might be telling her, stop letting her have any power over our happiness. And I want to tell Dad that while our door is always open to him, we need to move past talking about Heather every time we're together. Jason smiled, taking my hand across the table. I think that sounds healthy. And I'm proud of you for getting to this point. Later that night, I sent my father a text. Had a good talk with Jason tonight. Ready to fully move forward. Sunday dinner's still on, but let's agree to make it a Heather-free zone from now on. Love you, Dad. His response came quickly. Couldn't agree more. Love you too. It wasn't a perfect resolution. Heather was still out there, still nursing her resentments. But I was finally ready to stop allowing her behavior to dictate my emotions, my relationships, my life. Whatever choices she made going forward were hers alone to make, just as my choices were mine. For the first time since I could remember, I felt truly free. Life has a way of continuing, even after events that seem earth-shattering at the time. In the months following my wedding and the subsequent family fracture, Jason and I settled into the comfortable rhythms of married life. We established our own traditions: Sunday morning pancakes, Thursday night board games with friends, monthly day trips to explore New England. Our apartment became truly ours, a blend of his minimalist tendencies and my cozier aesthetic. Dad and I maintained our weekly dinners, carefully steering conversations away from Heather and toward more positive topics. He told me stories about my mother I'd never heard before, how they'd met at a bookstore when she accidentally knocked over an entire display trying to reach a volume on a high shelf, how she'd initially turned down his marriage proposal because she thought at 24 they were too young, only to change her mind a week later. She would have loved Jason, he said one evening as we finished dinner at his house. She always said you needed someone kind but strong, someone who would stand beside you rather than try to stand over you. She was right, I agreed, helping him clear the dishes. Though I wish she could have met him herself. Dad nodded, his eyes growing distant for a moment. I've been thinking about legacy lately, what your mother left behind, what I'll leave behind someday. Not money or possessions, but values, lessons. He rinsed a plate carefully before placing it in the dishwasher. I want you to know that despite all my failures, all my mistakes with you and Heather, your mother, and I were deeply proud of the person you are. Your compassion, your resilience, Those are qualities that will serve you well throughout your life. His words touched me deeply. For so long, I'd craved this kind of direct affirmation from him, this acknowledgement of my worth independent of comparison to Heather. That it came now, after so much pain and growth, made it all the more meaningful. As winter melted into spring, Jason and I celebrated our first anniversary by returning to Hartwell Gardens, the site of our wedding. The staff remembered us, the couple with the dramatic reception, as one server discreetly put it, and gave us their best table overlooking the gardens where we'd exchanged our vows. Any regrets? Jason asked, echoing the question he'd asked me at the end of our wedding night. I considered it seriously. About marrying you? Not a single one. About how everything unfolded with my family. I regret that it happened, but I don't regret how we handled it. We did the best we could with an impossible situation. I'm proud of us, he said, raising his glass in a toast. Here's to surviving the storm and building something beautiful in its aftermath. We clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this man who had stood steadfastly by my side through every twist and turn of the family drama. Who had never once suggested the easier path of cutting ties completely, but had instead supported my complicated journey of establishing boundaries while maintaining relationships where possible. 2 weeks after our anniversary, I woke feeling unusually queasy. After the third consecutive morning of rushing to the bathroom, Jason gave me a knowing look over breakfast. Maybe you should take a test, he suggested gently. The test was positive. A follow-up with my doctor confirmed what we'd suspected. I was pregnant, about 7 weeks along. The news filled me with a complex mixture of joy, anxiety, and overwhelming protectiveness toward the tiny life growing inside me. Telling my father was one of the most emotionally healing moments of my adult life. We met for our usual Sunday dinner, and I handed him a small box containing a onesie with Grandpa's favorite embroidered across the front. He stared at it uncomprehendingly for a moment, then looked up at me, his eyes widening. I'm going to be? I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Dad set the box down carefully and enveloped me in a hug, so tight it nearly took my breath away. When he pulled back, his face was wet with tears. Your mother would be over the moon, he whispered. A grandmother. She always wanted to be a grandmother. The moment was bittersweet, joy mingled with the sharp awareness of my mother's absence. Yet I felt her presence somehow, a spiritual connection that transcended the physical separation of death. I'll tell you all the stories, Dad promised. Every single one I can remember about your mother, about you as a baby. Your child will know her through our memories. As my pregnancy progressed, I found myself reflecting more deeply on family patterns and how they ripple through generations. Heather and I had grown up in the same household with the same parents, yet had developed radically different perspectives on our childhood and our places within the family. How much of that was inherent personality? How much was parental handling? How much was the invisible dynamics that exist between siblings? I worry sometimes, I confessed to Jason one night as we lay in bed, his hand resting protectively over my growing belly. What if our child inherits the worst of my family's traits? The jealousy, the manipulation, the inability to communicate honestly. First of all, Jason said, propping himself up on one elbow to look at me, those aren't traits you possess. They're your sister's issues, not yours. Second, we're going to be different parents than your parents were. We're going into this with our eyes open, aware of the pitfalls. But what if we have more than one child eventually? What if they end up like Heather and me? Some sibling rivalry is normal, Jason pointed out. What wasn't normal was how your parents handled it, your father avoiding conflict at all costs, your mother brushing it off as girls being girls. We'll address issues directly. We'll create a family culture where honest communication is valued over keeping the peace at any cost. His confidence reassured me. We were breaking the cycle, creating a new family dynamic based on the lessons we'd learned from the painful ruptures in my birth family. As my due date approached, I received an unexpected letter forwarded from my father's address. The return address was unfamiliar, but the handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Heather's. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether to open it or simply throw it away unread. Curiosity ultimately won out. Inside was a brief note and a check for a substantial amount. "I heard you're having a baby," the note read. "Whatever has happened between us, the child is innocent. This is for a college fund or whatever you think best." No strings attached. There was no signature, no further explanation. The gesture was simultaneously generous and distant, acknowledging our shared blood connection while maintaining emotional detachment. I showed the letter to Jason, who examined it carefully. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to tear up the check and send it back. Another part of me thinks that might be my pride talking, not what's best for our child." After much consideration, I decided to accept the money, depositing it in a separate account specifically for the baby's future needs. I sent a brief acknowledgement to the return address, a simple thank you note with no additional commentary. It wasn't a reconciliation, not even close, but it was a small thread of connection maintained. My father, when I told him about the exchange, seemed cautiously hopeful. "It's the first sign I've seen that she might be capable of change," he said. "Real change, not just tactical shifts in her manipulation strategies." I was less optimistic. Maybe. Or maybe she just wants to play the role of generous aunt without doing the actual work of addressing her behavior or taking responsibility for her actions. "You could be right," Dad acknowledged. "I've learned not to project my own hopes onto Heather's actions. But either way, it's something." In my 8th month of pregnancy, I received another unexpected communication, this time a formal card congratulating us on the baby, signed by Heather. No personal note, nothing beyond the pre-printed message, but it was another small acknowledgement of the changing family dynamics. I placed the card in a memory box I'd started for the baby, alongside ultrasound pictures and other mementos. Whatever happened between Heather and me, our child deserved to know they had an aunt, even if the relationship remained distant and complicated. When Emma Grace Campbell arrived on a snowy February morning, 7 pounds, 4 ounces of perfection with Jason's chin, and what Dad swore were my mother's eyes, the circle of life felt tangibly present in the delivery room. Dad waited anxiously in the hospital waiting area, and when Jason brought him in to meet his granddaughter for the first time, the expression of wonder on his face was something I'll never forget. "She's beautiful," he whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his cheeks as I placed Emma in his arms. "Just like you were." In that moment, watching my father cradle my daughter, I felt a profound sense of healing. The family fractures remained. Heather was conspicuously absent from the celebration of Emma's birth, but we had created something new and precious from the broken pieces. The first year of Emma's life brought the expected challenges of new parenthood, sleepless nights, breastfeeding struggles, the constant dance of balancing work and childcare. But it also brought unexpected joy in watching my father blossom into the role of doting grandfather. He visited regularly, always bringing books to read to Emma or small handmade toys he'd crafted in his newly discovered woodworking hobby. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he told me one afternoon as we watched Emma attempting to crawl across the living room floor. "Not just for giving her a beautiful granddaughter, but for the woman you've become. The way you've handled everything with such grace." "I don't always feel graceful," I admitted. "Sometimes I still get angry thinking about the wedding, about all the years Heather poisoned our relationship." "That's natural," Dad said. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending the hurt never happened. It means not letting that hurt continue to control your life." He smiled wryly. "At least, that's what my therapist tells me." As Emma's first birthday approached, I found myself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past 2 years, from the wedding disaster to the family implosion to the indescribable joy of motherhood. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led me here, to a life filled with love and authenticity. One afternoon, while Emma napped and Jason was at work, I found myself opening the drawer where I'd stored Heather's bitter letter from over a year ago. Reading it again, I was struck not by the anger it had once provoked, but by the sadness I now felt for my sister. The letter revealed someone trapped in a prison of her own making, someone whose worldview was so distorted by jealousy and insecurity that she couldn't recognize the damage she was causing to others, yes, but most of all to herself. On impulse, I sat down and wrote Heather a letter of my own. Not an angry rebuttal, not a plea for reconciliation, but an honest account of my experience, my perspective, and my hopes for the future. I wrote about Emma, about how the door would always be open should Heather ever want to meet her niece, but with clear boundaries about what kind of behavior would be acceptable around my child. I don't expect a response to this letter, I concluded. I'm not even sure if you'll read it. But I wanted you to know that despite everything, I still remember the sister you were before the competition and resentment took over. I remember playing dress-up in Mom's clothes, building forts in the backyard, sharing secrets under the covers with flashlights after bedtime. Those memories are real too. And I hope that someday, you'll find the peace and security within yourself to let go of the bitterness that's caused us both so much pain. I sealed the letter but didn't mail it. Perhaps someday I would, if the moment felt right. For now, it was enough to have articulated my feelings, to have reached a place where I could view Heather with compassion rather than anger. The day of Emma's first birthday party arrived, a joyous gathering of close friends and family in our backyard. Dad had outdone himself with a handcrafted wooden rocking horse as Emma's gift, while Jason's parents brought a miniature play kitchen that immediately became the center of attention for the birthday girl. As we were cutting the cake, a simple homemade creation rather than the elaborate wedding cake that had featured in so many of my fraught family memories, the doorbell rang. Jason went to answer it, returning with a puzzled expression and a beautifully wrapped package. "It's for Emma," he said, handing me the accompanying card. "From Heather." A hush fell over the gathering. My father froze mid-scoop of ice cream, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The card simply read, "Happy birthday to my niece. Maybe someday we'll meet. Aunt Heather." Inside the package was a silver picture frame, inscribed with the words, "Family is forever," containing a photo I hadn't seen in years, Heather and me as children, arms around each other, laughing at some long-forgotten joke. I passed the frame to my father, who studied it with misty eyes. "It's from the summer we rented that lake house," he said softly. "You girls were inseparable that week." The gift wasn't an apology. It wasn't even necessarily an olive branch. But it was an acknowledgement of shared history, of blood ties that, however strained, could never be completely severed. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Heather and I haven't reconciled. I'm not sure we ever will, at least not in the traditional sense of returning to close sisterly bonds. But small gestures continue, birthday cards for Emma, occasional brief text messages marking major holidays, a donation in my mother's name to the Cancer Research Foundation I support. Dad maintains his own complex, limited relationship with Heather, careful not to let it interfere with our rebuilt father-daughter connection. He's found a balance I once thought impossible, loving both his daughters without enabling harmful behavior from either of us. As for Jason and me, we're expecting our second child now, a boy, according to the ultrasound. I'd be lying if I said I didn't worry about sibling dynamics, about history repeating itself. But we're going into parenthood with open eyes and hard-won wisdom about family patterns, determined to create a home where differences are celebrated rather than compared, where honest communication is valued over keeping the peace at any cost. The wedding day that went so terribly wrong feels like a lifetime ago now, a painful but necessary catalyst for the growth and healing that followed. My father didn't walk me down the aisle that day, a loss I still grieve sometimes, but he has walked beside me every day since, working tirelessly to rebuild what was broken, to be the father I always needed him to be. Life rarely gives us perfect resolutions. Heather remains a complicated presence in our family story, distant but not entirely absent, a reminder of how easily love can twist into something unrecognizable when filtered through insecurity and fear. But she's also a reminder of how strong I've become, how capable of setting boundaries, of choosing my own path forward. If there's a lesson in all of this, perhaps it's that true family isn't about blood ties or perfect harmony. It's about choosing to love even when it's difficult, about setting healthy boundaries when necessary, about finding the courage to break destructive patterns even when they're generations deep. It's about building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. As I watch Emma playing with her grandfather in our sunlit backyard, her laughter ringing out clear and joyful, I know that despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, we've created something beautiful and authentic. A family defined not by perfection, but by honesty, resilience, and unconditional love. Have you ever experienced family drama that changed your relationships forever? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear they're not alone in navigating complicated family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that even when family wounds cut deep, healing is always possible, though it may not look like what you initially expected. Love and light to you all.